Welcome back to Ecclesiastes, a most fascinating and very practical book. For all I've learned over the years, I'm still amazed at its ability to speak to every time and every situation and every person. And I'm enjoying my time in the book again, and looking forward to continuing to share with you. And so this lesson is going to be about God and God's program and purposes. And I've entitled it, "It All Makes Sense to God, so Accept It and Rejoice." You know, we tend to think, well, just because it makes sense to God, it doesn't make sense to me, so let's change something, or let's figure something out. But the book of Ecclesiastes tells us how to get a hold of that whole scenario. Just to review, this is a book about a metaphor, a controlling metaphor. Vapor of vapors, says the preacher. Vapor of vapors, all is vaporous, or thinnest of vapors, all is a puff of breath. And a metaphor compares two things that are unlike but have some sort of similarities. And the thing, one, is of course this breath that everything is declared to be. Thing two is an activity. The activity of trying to discover how to put things together in a more satisfying way. Basically, it's how to deal with the concept of providence. Providence being defined as God graciously guiding and governing all events, including the free acts of people and their external circumstances, and directs all things to their appointed ends for His glory. And I believe that that's what the question in verse 3 of the book, what does man gain or profit from all his labor in which he labors under the sun? And as we've looked at the book kind of in an introductory fashion so far, I've tried to point out that this is consistently how this term and this activity is portrayed. And we're actually getting into exposition last week, and you say, why has it taken you so long to actually start talking to the text and working through the text? But it's like building a building. The higher the building, the more time spent on the foundation. In fact, you look at some of these skyscrapers, and they'll spend as much time digging and laying the foundation as they will putting up the superstructure, even though the amount of elevation is far, far different. And that's what we've been doing, because there are just a lot of things that we kind of have to get a hold of in order to, I think, make this book make its best sense. So last week we looked at the dual introduction at the end of chapter 1, and then worked through chapter 2 with regard to Solomon's just personal experience in his own work and his own life. And the dual introduction, first of all, focuses on this quest when he says, "I've sought out and searched by wisdom concerning all that is done under the sky." Now he's just talking about him or people. He's talking about all that God does, and that's clear as you work through the book. And then he says it's a heavy burden or business that God has given to the sons of men to be busied with. We'll come back to this statement a little later. And so it focuses on works. And that's what chapter 2 is going to be about, the rest of it. And then on the other part of the double in introduction, we noticed how this word wisdom occurs over and over and over. And that will actually be a majority of the book, beginning at about chapter 4, which we will get into eventually. And but this morning I want to go back, I want to look at the whole of chapter 3, part of which will be a review, because there's this key passage in there about what Solomon's quest is. But before we get into that, I want to go back to the very first verse. And I intentionally don't begin with the first verse when I'm teaching the book of Ecclesiastes, because it doesn't make as much sense as if we kind of delay it. And I've delayed it a little farther than normal for these lessons. But it has to do with the identity or the who's writing the book. It's introduced as the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. And the question here is this identity or role indicators? Well, if it's identity, all you have to do is just write in the word Solomon. Okay, you told me who it is, who's writing it, that's all I need to know. Solomon could have done that, but he introduced himself, and I think it was Solomon writing. I don't think it was somebody else writing as though they were Solomon or writing way down past when Solomon lived. And there's every book of the Bible has been accused of that by somebody. We'll just take it at face value. But it's not simply identity, but role indicators. He's wanting to lay out what he's doing and why he's qualified to do it. And the word Kohelet, which is the word translated preacher, and I'll use that interchangeably with Solomon, so I'm not, back and forth. I may say Kohelet or I may Solomon. It may just depend on what I was quoting or thinking about at the time. But it's a functional indicator because this word, Kohelet, in Hebrew, has the idea of an assembly or an assembler. And ecclesiastical has to do with church stuff, okay? Assembly of Christians type of things. And so as a functional indicator, it talks about him as being an assembler of the people, but into the presence of God. And this pretty much rings true throughout the whole book, and it will be brought back into focus at the end of the book. Son of David, and of course, son of David would immediately bring Solomon to mind, probably has to do with his role as a shepherd of the people. The kings of Israel were to be the shepherds of their people. In fact, in the ancient East, kings were often referred to as fathers or shepherds of their people. So this would not be notable, this would not be strange. But what he's emphasizing is I'm here in a pastoral capacity. And we'll see that in a moment from a quotation at the end of the book. And then king in Jerusalem. And this has to do with his experience indicator. Now, from the standpoint of Israel, he was only the second king in Jerusalem. We got King David, well, you get King Saul. But there were kings in Jerusalem for a long time. So this would have meant something to people, and they're saying, okay, he's got experience. And Solomon's fame went, throughout the world. You remember the Queen of Sheba came to visit him and to marvel at his wisdom. And so he's not just bragging, he's saying, this is what qualifies me to delve into this subject. So this is brought out at the end of the book, chapter 12, verses 9 to 11. We have a double epilogue to go with the double introduction. Further, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he pondered, sought out, and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to find out acceptable words, and that which was written blamelessly, words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails well fastened are the words from the masters of assemblies. Interesting the way this version terms that, which are given from one shepherd. So I think that really brackets with the introduction in terms of the role indicators as what this is about. And I want to reemphasize what we've looked at in a couple of places in the last few weeks, is where wisdom comes from. And this is a quotation out of Proverbs 2, a book which Solomon is mostly responsible for. And he's talking about wisdom. He says, if you seek her as silver and search for her as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord, the fear of Yahweh. That is, you'll understand about the believing life. You'll understand about what it is to put your trust in God and live in faith, in response to Him in faith. And find the knowledge of God. For Yahweh, or the Lord, gives wisdom. Out of His mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He lays up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, that He may guard the paths of justice and preserve the way of His saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice, equity, and every good path. So this is where Solomon is coming from. And we need to get this fixed in our thinking, because it's necessary, because there's a very popular idea about the book that all the negative statements have to do with the impossibility of finding God through what some call natural revelation. And we've referred to this earlier. And I made gave a couple of quotations by people who have indicated why that's not the best way to look at the book. And so these reasons are why I think there's a better way to look at the book. All the statements about that indicate Kohelet is writing from the standpoint of wisdom. And he just belabors the point in chapters 1 and 2. By wisdom, and I guided my heart by wisdom. And we looked at some of those passages about wine and so forth. And what he's saying is this isn't a hedonistic exercise to just go and just let it loose and see what happens in my life. He's, as a wise man, thinking through the approach to life. Commitment to wisdom is repeated through all these contexts. Proverbs sets forth the nature and consequences of living apart from God in relation to the fool. And a lot of Ecclesiastes is proverbial. And, when you read it, you say, oh, I feel like I'm in Proverbs. Well, they go together, and Solomon was the author of both. The view that he's writing as if he was a fool is really pretty subtle and leads to all kinds of logical conflicts, and it violates Occam's razor. Anybody know what Occam's razor is in 5 words? The simplest solution is usually the best, So the more complicated explanations you have to have of some position, the less likely that's what, the solution to the position is. And I just think there's a more straightforward, less complicated to read the book, and that's what we're kind of looking at. Now, with regard to Proverbs, it's a collection of extended discourses and self-contained sayings, which is more or less self-confirming generalizations about how life works in God's world, are designed to produce in the hearer a successful life experience to the degree that such an experience depends on his or her actions. Of course, the short definition is just to leave out the colored, the bluish, purplish, just a collection of discourses and sayings about how life works in God's world designed to make us successful. But that's not all of life, because Proverbs aren't promises. And you've probably gotten into problems sometime in the past taking a statement like, whatever, and tried to make it a promise, and it doesn't work. Because God is still free. God is still free. And that means wisdom literature embraces both, here's the way to live that's best, and if you do this, you can expect this. But then there's also when that doesn't happen. And not just in Israel, but in the ancient East, wisdom literature had both of these aspects. The proverbial, where it's instructions for successful living, and then the side that deals with the perplexities of human existence that are contemplated. In fact, we've unearthed in some of the ancient records like the Babylonian Job. So there's those types of stories that have come up with, here's a good man who suffered, and what do you do with all this? So these two aspects both are part of wisdom literature. And of course, Ecclesiastes brings them both together, but it's really weighted with regard to the perplexity side, as is Job. And that's why I call this the interesting twin of Job, the book of Ecclesiastes. So what Solomon is looking for is how to better understand God's providential designs, as we just noted. And that is, he's trying to, what does this profit in this search? And we've noted that. And this concept of something that would be beneficial recurs throughout the book, and we will run into this. So chapter 2 focused on Solomon's living of his life and considering how the foolish might impact his legacy. And we looked at that, and he goes on with all of his works, and then he says, this really didn't give me the keys to what's going on here. And then he considered, well, the life from the fool, and he said, obviously, that's not the way to get a handle on God's bigger overall purposes. And then he brings those two together, and in chapter 2, he kind of bemoans the fact, I've done all of this, I've created all of this, and what if I leave it to somebody who just doesn't appreciate it and who just wastes it? And so that kind of brings the accomplishments of Solomon together with the bad effects of the fool, and said, boy, that sure is vaporous. That's, how do you get a hold of that and make anything of that? So that's what chapter 2 is. Chapter 3 focuses almost exclusively on God. God's appointment of all things and our inability to see the whole from an outside perspective. And we're all familiar with this. If you have hair that's more my color, you'll remember the song by the Byrds. Yeah, turn, it's the time for this, the time for that. As a young Christian, I thought, what are they doing writing from the Ecclesiastes? What a text for a song. But, it was popular, and people learned something about the Bible from that song, even though they didn't realize they were quoting it. But, this for everything there's a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. And so it goes through a time to be born and die, plant, pluck up, heal, or kill, heal, break down, build up, and so forth. And as you go through here, and actually the song was written from a human perspective. There's a time for this and a time for this. There's been enough time for war. Let's have a time for peace. Okay, we're back in the 60s and, the peace movement and okay. So I think that's one of the things that probably stimulated the song and this text. Enough of killing, enough of hating. It's time for love. Well, that's true. I mean, there's truth to those things. But what he's laying out here is that there is a season, and the word season has to do with an appropriate time. And then the word purpose. The word purpose actually, in some contexts, the Hebrew word that's translated purpose here, some other versions have matter, is more than just kind of the vanilla word for an activity. It's a word that in some contexts means the delight of something or delighting in something. For instance, in Isaiah 46:9, Isaiah writes, "Remember the former things of old," or this is God speaking, "Remember the former things of old, for I am God and there's none else. I am God and there's none like me, declaring the end from the beginning." Well, that's in Ecclesiastes, and that's what Solomon would like to figure out, the end from the beginning. "And from ancient times things that are not yet done, saying, My counsel shall stand, and I will do my pleasure." And that's the word, pleasure. And it's the idea that when God does something, it has a positive meaning to him because it fits into everything else he's doing. In other words, there's no parts left out, no parts added in that shouldn't be there in terms of God's work and what God's doing. And that's kind of how this starts out. And so every purpose under heaven, it's beautiful, it's appropriate, is the idea. Beautiful is a word that sometimes translates this Hebrew word in some context. But he's saying, no matter what it is, you've got all these opposites. When it happens, it's appropriate. Now, is that always true from our standpoint? No. And is this actually written for human beings to determine what's appropriate? Well, sometimes it would work. And we actually try to figure out the right times to do things, okay? You know when the right time to plant your garden is and when the wrong time is. You do it too early, it might freeze and so forth, okay? So we do with it. And why do we do that? Well, because we're made in God's likeness. We bear his image. And so we plan and we carry out plans and we have expectations. And sometimes we say, that wasn't a good idea. It would be better to do it this way. So all of these things, sometimes we do find ourselves in positions of needing to plan and purpose and so forth. But it's not consistent. Sometimes we don't make the right choices, and sometimes we don't have any choice. It's just this happens or this happens. War happens or peace happens, and I have nothing to do with it. I'm just standing there watching or being involved in the mayhem. So I don't think this is written primarily as a prescriptive passage, but rather as a descriptive. In other words, it's describing God and God's works, all the works that he does, And from Solomon's standpoint, under the sun, because that's the only works that we are privy to, isn't it? We don't know what he's doing in heavens. He might tell us some things, but we don't know those. What we see is what's under the sun. We're living in this realm, and we are confined in that. So while sometimes this idea of us choosing between these pairs is appropriate, for God, this is always true. When this happens, it's under God's sovereign control, okay? Now, you can argue whether he determines it or allows it. It doesn't matter. God's in control, okay? And he's, working all things to the counsel of his will is another verse that may come to mind when we think about this. So this introduces this chapter, which I find really is focusing now on God. Solomon's focused on what he has done in order to try and figure out more about the providential workings of God. But this is about God and what he is doing sovereignly in these arrangements. So that brings us to verse 10. And we've looked at this before because I think this verses 10 to 11 are the key verses that help us understand this idea of Solomon's quest to figure out the providential workings of God. So it says, what profit has he who works in that in which he labors? Okay, and this goes back to the original question in the book. What does man gain from all his labor in which he labors under the sun? Now this is the same version, but in one place it translates the word profit. In another version it translates as gain, but the same word, same idea, okay? We just have to deal with those things with regard to translations and how words are used in various contexts. And notice labors. And we looked at the work words, remember, for the three kinds of words: work, labor, toil, and task. And so we've got all three of them here. We've got the task we're going to see, and then profit and labors. I have seen the burden which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. Now again, we have to deal with translation. This is the task word. It's our business. So if you wanted to be just rigidly literal in translating this verse, you could say, I have seen the business which God has given to the sons of men to be busied with, all right? But it's the task word, the big word. Remember I gave you the widgets example? Okay, guy makes widgets. He has a widget company and he wants to find out the most economical way to make widgets. So he stands at his widget machine all day long and he tries various methods to see if there's one method of producing his widgets that would be less time, less money, less waste, and therefore more profit for his business. At the end of the day, he's got a pile of widgets. That's the word work. Look at my work. Well, here's my works, And he's expended toil. He sweated the widget machine. That was the toiling. That was the labor part of it. Now, so he's labored. He's enjoyed the labor. He likes to do this. Well, for a while anyway, as the boss. Okay, maybe not all the time. And he's got a pile of work on the floor. Has he met his task? Well, don't know. Maybe he did find an economical way to do it. Maybe he didn't. And that's what's going on in the book of Ecclesiastes with regard to the various uses of the word work and toil in business. In Ecclesiastes' situation, though, Solomon is trying to determine how to understand, get a firm hold on the providential workings of God. And God says, it ain't going to happen. So it's an impossible task, and Solomon is writing about that. So that's our business. It goes on, he has made everything beautiful in its time. That kind of goes with the first part here of the chapter where we saw all of these things that are happening. And this actually refers to God's providential designs. He has made everything appropriate. When something happens, it fits into God's overall scheme. Nothing wasted, nothing added that shouldn't be there, nothing left out that should be there. From God's standpoint, We can't figure that out, and we can often disagree. God can't see any good sense coming from this. This is awful. This is a tragedy. This is horrible. You're a moral, just, wise, good, powerful God. How could you let this happen? We all have those emotions. We all have those thoughts. And Solomon had those thoughts. That's what's troubling him. So, everything beautiful in its time, but he's also set eternity in their hearts. We want to figure it out. We want to make cause and effect relationships. We want to answer the questions, why? But we can't answer all those questions. Some things we can figure out. Some things God reveals to us that we wouldn't know otherwise. But we can only go to a certain place. This is what drives us. This is what was driving Solomon. He was made to ask the question why. And God has made us to ask the question why. And because we are made to ask the question why, we come up with all kinds of inventions and understand all kinds of things. You know, we're able to make implements that can haul us into space and circle over the earth and go to the moon and you know, delve into the microscopic parts of our universe. You know, we've got a lot of why questions answered and questions answered. But God is going to give us the ability to put it all together. And that's what this is about. Because he says then, yet, he's set us on that course, yet so that man can't find out the work that God has done from the beginning even to the end. This is what frustrates us. And this is what Solomon continually says, vapor. You know, everything I look at with regard to getting a handle on this is like grasping the wind. It's like grabbing a hold of a vapor. He's not talking about meaninglessness of life. He's talking about the impossibility of him figuring out how to make the best widget, okay? How to come to grips with the providence of God. So we see all three words, work words, involved in this one passage, and they repeat themselves and over and over through the book, and that's where this is it. This is the best summary verse of the whole book. So we've looked at these three verses before, but there are two verses that follow it. We don't want to miss the refrain. So when he gets to this frustration point, and this is how the book, it builds up to frustration, and then the release is not, oh, forget it, I'm not going to think about it anymore. The release is the refrain. This refrain in one form or another occurs 7 times in the book, and we will look at them. I know that there's nothing better for them than to rejoice and do good as long as they live. Also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy good in all his labor. This is the gift of God. This is the sum. This is the advice of the book. You can't figure it out, so do this. Okay, and I've mentioned that before. Now, just as a sidelight, the word rejoice. This is the 6th time it's occurred in the book, and I think it'll occur another 11 or 12 times. And it's the word that everywhere means joy. It's the rejoice, joy word. Earlier, in some translations, it's downplayed into pleasure or something. But I think that's kind of a look of, well, he's kind of caricaturizing hedonism here, but he's not. He's always talking about joy in his work, joy in his pursuits, joy in the Lord, joy in the spite of the fact that he cannot understand. So this is a refrain that always comes at the end of his little mini climaxes of disappointment and frustration. It's not to be angry. It's not to be bitter. It's not to say, well, God, if you won't give me an answer to this, you don't deserve my worship. It's worship God. Worship God, because here is life with all of its perplexities. But God has given me the command and the ability to rejoice in my work, in my labors, no matter what's going on around me. And this will occur over and over again, and we'll look in more detail at some of the elements here. So going on in the In the next verses here, verse 14 of chapter 3, Solomon declares all of God's work is complete, appropriate, and permanent, and not at all in conflict with the development of our faith. It says in verse 14, I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it, and God has done it. Why? That people should fear before Him. He's saying the providential working of God in its totality is not to destroy faith. In fact, it's the purpose of building faith. I can think of a number of negative things that happened in my life as a child and as a young person that I didn't like, didn't enjoy, couldn't see any benefit for them. But as I look back, I could see how God used them to lead me to the point where I trusted in Christ. Okay? Now, that's just a little tiny glimpse of what was going on. I can't ever know the totality of it. Maybe He'll reveal it to me someday, in glory. Or I'll bump into, over the next millennia or millions and hundreds of millions of years, I'll bump into all the people that had a God used in my life. I mean, but that's, God is always at work to move people to faith. And so that's the first part of this statement. So what He does is appropriate, it's complete, and it's permanent. And then he talks about justice here. Now, this is a very, very interesting passage. He said, that which is has been long ago, and that which is to be has been long ago, and God seeks again that which is passed away. What's he saying? God is everywhere and every when, right? Past, present, future, all right? Yeah, now He's going to apply this. Moreover, I saw under the sun, in the place of justice, that wickedness was there, and in the place of righteousness, that wickedness was there. Now, as I said, remember we talked about the Fibonacci sequence where you've got, this and the spiral that goes out, and you can draw the spiral. It's a regular, and it broadens and broadens and broadens. And the more I think about that, there's that kind of a system going on in Proverbs. Now he mentions here about wickedness replacing justice and righteousness. He's going to deal with this several more times in the book. If you've read the book, you'll remember those. But he drops it in here. He's going to make a point here, but then he's going to come back and pick this up. So we've got this cycle that probably is ever widening, and the Holy Spirit and Solomon have really woven together a very interesting thing here. So he says, I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. God will judge. Well, I know people who've died, in their righteousness, and they didn't seem to die as a judgment of God. Does that mean they won't get judged for their unrighteousness? Well, is God through with people at death? No. So we can't go back and capture what has been lost. Those things are gone for us, but they're not gone for God. Now let me just, I write a lot better than I talk. So let me just share something that I've written here about this. Faith in God as a good moral governor is justified because He alone knows and controls all events, regardless of the issue of time. The idea of time being a non-issue from God's standpoint in His appropriate working is continued in the assertion that things both are and will have already been from God's perspective. That it is and it's already been, and what will be. Yeah. So it's a really interesting complex here. While people can never go back to change or address past actions, God seeks what has passed by as the all-present and all-knowing God that He is. To illustrate this, Solomon cites a far too frequent occurrence in daily experience, life under the sun, namely wickedness displacing justice and righteousness.
Once those injustices occur in our time-bound experience, there are consequences that can never be reversed from our standpoint, right? And on the other hand, there are judgments that are never seem to be wrought in our time. However, it is not so with God, who will in the future be able to judge, that is, dispense appropriate justice, both the righteous man and the wicked man. For both the righteous man, to judge both the righteous man and the wicked man. Just because justice and righteousness were not applied when due does not mean that it is past God's reckoning, because He is the one who ultimately sets the time for every matter and for every deed. The basic meaning of the word translated matter or delight, we've talked about that. And you notice here, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. You notice that additional there, that's not an English addition. There's actually a word there in the Hebrew text that commentators just puzzle over it and ponder. What's that there for? What's that there for? Okay. And the interesting thing is that this word does occur in a context in Job where Job is talking about, let me just read it. He's talking about it. He says, "Why did I not die at birth? Why did I not perish when I came from the womb? Why did the knees receive me?" And so forth. And then he says down in verse 17, "There the wicked cease from troubling." What's the there? It's the place instead of birth, which is death. In that context, he actually uses that word to talk about, it'd be better for me to be there. That is, dead in the womb or dead before the womb or, in a state of non-being. He's just hypothesizing. This is so troubling. And then the small and great are there, and the servant is free from his master. So that's an interesting contact with Job, perhaps. And so the point is that that time is nothing to God. And so when we think about justice and we think about equity and we think about judgment, for us, it doesn't seem like there's ever time for justice. And the wicked prolong their lives in wickedness, and then they die, and they never get punished for their wickedness. Well, they will. And the rest of the Bible makes that clear in a number of ways. So Solomon is bringing that out here to show that ultimate justice is in play with God. It's just that it may not be seen in this life. It's not going to be completely worked out and adjudicated under the sun. Okay? So what we can see here is that Solomon is giving us a perspective of the fact that God is above and outside of time and above and outside of our physical universe. That's where we live. And for all that He's revealed to us about the concept of justice and so forth. See here, he's not writing as somebody who's living apart from God. He's living under God, a God who's revealed Himself. And so this is, I think, a very, very, very interesting way to get at this. God is outside of time, and I can't even handle living in time. So, God has said, "I'll take care of it. Justice will happen, but you're not going to be able to make the connections of what you're seeing now under the sun." Our God needs to be continually getting bigger in our minds, as our problems get bigger. And you see, that's the development of faith, isn't it? So, that's the whole thing of faith. We walk by faith, not by sight. And the whole book is about what Solomon can't see with regard to the providential workings of God. But that's faith but I still know the God who's revealed Himself. So Solomon declares all of God's work is complete, appropriate, and permanent, and not at all in conflict with the development of faith that affirms ultimate justice for all. And he will work through some of these things in the rest of the book.
Well, the next two verses, verse 18 through 22, Solomon observes that from the standpoint of physical death, people are as transitory as the higher animals. Now, this gets some really interesting discussions with regard to commentaries and so forth. He says, I said in my heart, as the sons of men, God, and the word can be test, but another word for test is to make clear. Sometimes we test things to see what they are, okay? Not to see that they see them fail. And that's more the sense here. God makes clear to them that they may see that they themselves are like animals. For that which happens to the sons of men happens to animals. Even one thing happens to them. As one dies, so the other dies. Yes, they all, or both, have one breath. And man has no advantage over the animals, for all is vaporous. Both, all go to one place. All are from the dust, and all turn to dust. Now, notice for all, I've written both here. And this is something you need to keep in mind when you're reading through a book like Ecclesiastes. Hebrew does not have a word for both. It uses the word which in some context is translated all right? It's the Hebrew kol. And you determine from the context what kol refers to. It can refer to everything that there ever is. It can refer to 1,000 things. It can refer to, all people. It can refer to two things. And that's what it is here. And you find kol all the way through. So if we make a mistake, if every time we see all is vaporous, that he's talking about everything that there is, the context here, he's not talking about everything that there is. He's talking about animals and men with regard to transitoriness and physical death. So that's just a little lexical word meaning thing, and that's why I've done that, just to clarify that he's making a comparison here between animals and men. Basically, he's just saying humans and animals, the higher animals, are alike in being living, breathing creatures. Okay? We know that, don't we? Okay? And so we feel, more affinity to that part of the animate creation than anything else. Can relate to an amoeba. Anybody ever had a relationship with an amoeba? Nope. Worm? Nope. Nope. But you can have a relationship with a horse or a dog or a cat because we kind of live more in the same realm. But it's not identical, is it? But the point here is humans and the higher animals are alike in being living, breathing creatures, but also, and when each gives up that breath, the body returns to dust. So a horse dies like we do. They stop breathing, they die, and they return to dust. So we are like the higher animals in that respect, okay? And that's but then the application point is, which makes the point that our under the sun lives are transitory. So, they're fleeting. Physical life doesn't last forever. It's, an average, in different periods and then it ends. So that's all he's saying here. But it's the next verses that kind of get us all wrapped up in ourselves. Verse 18, I said in my heart, as for the sons of men, God makes clear to them that they may see that they themselves are like animals. For that which happens to the sons of men happens to animals. Even one thing happens to them. As the one dies, so the other dies. Yes, they all both have one breath. Man has no advantage over the animals. And this is what we just looked at. All go to one place. All both are from dust, and the dust returns to dust. And then he says, who knows the spirit of man, whether it goes upward, the spirit of the animal, whether it goes down to the earth? And what we find here is, obviously our lives are transitory. And Solomon is basically concluding that human beings cannot know what will be after death by simply observing the process of death. So all he's saying is, because we live locked in time, and we don't, now we know a lot more about the afterlife now than these original readers did, but we still don't know much, okay? So, but what I know is that we die like the animals.
But by revelation here, he says, the spirit of man, and this isn't the same word for breath. It's translated breath in one place and spirit in two others. It's more the animating life principle that both animals and human beings, are. They have this sense. It's not the word soul. It's the word which was normally translated spirit, the spirit of an animal. But all he's concluding here is that human beings cannot know what will be after death by simply observing the process. Because what he says here, after death, human beings have an upward relationship, animals don't, okay? Just the point he's making is we're limited, we have this limitation. Now, so again, it's something that's a pondering, something that's just out there, don't understand. But notice how he concludes, Therefore, I saw that there's nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his works, for that is his portion. For who can bring him to see what will be after him? So we can still receive and enjoy life as a good gift from the eternal God, even though death is just one of those really troubling things, and we just don't really have a handle on what it all's like afterwards, okay? So you notice he always ends with a positive. He always ends with a rejoice, accept life. So just some summary points here. I would say this, rejoice in what I can do, letting that feed me. And he says that's your portion. That's the word that's used of Israel inheriting the land, their portion. So what you're given to live on, to be enriched by, to feed you, to sustain you. And that's used in a spiritual sense. It's used in an interpersonal sense. And I think I mentioned last week or the week before, the verse that says, God is our portion. That's the idea, same word. He's our vitalizing force in life, our vitalizing presence. So rejoice in what I can do, letting that feed me, rather than obsessing over what I can't know. That's what Ecclesiastes is about. God's given me this life to live as a good gift. Rejoice in that. Don't get all hung up over what you don't understand. Because Solomon says, in the end, there's more you can't understand than you can understand. But that doesn't mean life is not livable in joy. And that's at the heart of the message of this book. And thereby avoid bitterness, anger, and despair. These are three possible outcomes to the kinds of situations that Solomon is visioning and dealing with. And you probably all know, and you maybe have even been in this situation at one time or another, where people were angry with God, bitter over something that God allowed to happen in their lives, in despair. And that's not Solomon's solution. Solomon, as the wisest man and in his prodigious research, has felt more than any other human being what this is. The Lord Jesus Christ experienced the injustices and so forth more than any person, including Solomon. But he lived life joyfully. He lived life unto the worship of the Father. And so that's just a very, very practical lesson and perspective that runs all the way through the book. And just to finish this, by worshiping our God, who in his sovereignty is wise and good and just. These are probably the three chief characteristics that stand out in this book. He's wise, he's good, and he's just. So even though we see injustice and we don't see it being dealt with now, this passage says it eventually will be. And faith trusts God with that. And that means it takes it away from me as a negative focus, which keeps me from enjoying the life which God has given me to live. So just to review, do you have this memorized yet? Frustrated in his exhaustive efforts to understand God's providential design as it impacts our earthly experience. And that just goes over and over and over through the book. Kohelet concludes that one must still enjoy life as a gift of God. This is not a hedonistic enjoyment of life.
This isn't an enjoyment of life in the place of serving God or suffering for God or being involved in whatever God puts us in. But it's really just taking each day and living it with joy in regard to the work that God's given us to do. All the while living it responsibly by trusting in the one to whom He must ultimately give an account. At the end of the book, in the epilogue, the conclusions, it'll talk about being accountable. Obey the commandments, and we'll be accountable for that. Accountability runs all the way through the book. We see it right here. We see it right here in this passage. I'm accountable. I'm accountable for how I handle life. And I've got a whole page full of verses that show this accountability running through the book. So that's what it's about, and that's why I call it an ode to joy. Joy is a dominant mood of this book. The dominant emotion is frustration in some regards, but the dominant mood is one of joy, because Solomon always turns from his moments of frustration over this investigative activity that he's involved in to just an expression of rejoice, eat, drink, and not be merry for tomorrow you die. That's hedonism. Eat and drink and enjoy life because it's a gift of God. And he wants to live it by faith, to live it in the moment, in our labors and in our activities, even though life is singing off key, even though life is throwing all kinds of clunkers into my day-to-day experience. So that's what the book is about, and that takes us through chapter 3, which emphasizes God. And when we get back to looking at texts in chapter 4, Solomon will start talking about various situations, and we will work through as much of that material as we can. We will certainly work through the last several chapters in some detail, because they're unique in some ways to the book of Ecclesiastes.